Saints offseason decisions. Will Mickey Loomis finally do something different with head coach? This is Hunt Palmer Show, and Sharif from WDSU. Let's go ahead and listen to what these two hombres have to say about the Saints and the offseason and the rebuild. And your boy right here, the face of the franchise, will react along the way.
Fantastic. It feels great. I'm finally happy that dreaded 5-12 nasty season's over with and never have to deal with it again.
It was not good, but it is going to bring about some change. My question is a hypothetical here, but I want you to give me your thoughts on this. Do you believe that this season and the last 4 seasons have created an urgency in the front office to do things differently, or they feel like their process is pretty good, they've just got to get the right guy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're going to do things differently. This is like, Saints fans have been acting like, players don't get older, rosters don't turn over, or it's just kind of a thing where the Saints obviously believe that they had a window to win, which they did, no doubt about it, like building around the Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk core, like building Cam Jordan, like building around that group was totally understandable. Like that's a very good group. And it just fell apart. Players got older, players got worse, players got injured, players got traded, players got released. And so we're at the end of that now. Like, I keep saying this, but we are at the end of that core and that window. Or, I mean, we're past the end now, but, there isn't a choice anymore. There is not a choice of will they do things differently or will they do things the same. There is no the same. What is the same? Run it back with who? Run it back with Marshawn Lattimore and all these. They're not on the team anymore. Running back with Michael, he's not on the team anymore. Running back with Drew Brees, he's not on the team anymore. Running back with Dennis Allen, he's not on the team anymore. Like, all the run it back, that whole crew, that whole crowd, they gone pecan. Okay? So the Saints have to rebuild the next window. That's it. That's where we're at. That is where we are staring. And part of that is kind of exciting. Part of that is exciting to see, okay, well then what will they do? Who will be part of that next window? Who will be the next great quarterback? Who will be the next great coach? Who will be the next great defensive player, the next great offensive player? What will the defense look like when it's top 5 defense in the NFL? That is coming. That is on the way. When will it happen? We don't know. But we are currently on the journey of finding out. All right. We could easily be in 2004 where we're a couple years away from Drew Brees walking through that door or Sean Payton walking through that door and giving us 15 years of being one of the best franchises in the NFL. All right. We could be 10 years away. We could be 5. Who knows? But we have begun that journey. And the idea that they'll do anything but rebuild or do anything but start anew or do anything but try and find the next, the next identity of this team, I think it's crazy.
I think I hate to say this, I think I'm going to go with the latter. Okay. And I know that's not one to hear because they're so comfortable with what's easy to them. And what's easy is being comfortable, if that makes sense to you. And that's why you keep seeing names like Aaron Glenn pop up and him being maybe the front runner for the head coaching job. It's because they're comfortable with Glenn since he was in the building from 16 to 20 as a secondary coach. So I, in my opinion, think that's the lazy, easy way out. I think that they should become comfortable at being uncomfortable and doing something different like they did after the Hurricane Katrina season and hire Sean Payton. I think they need someone who is an offensive-minded head coach. That's where the game is today. It's an offensive, it's an offensive game. I think they should do that. And would I be upset if they hired Aaron Glenn? No. I think he's a brilliant, head coach probably in years to come. I think he has a chance to be a good head coach. Look what he's done this year with a beat-up Lions squad that's been almost decimated by injuries. So they can relate there if he's a Saints head coach and dealing with injuries. But I think they need to start thinking outside of that building and that Sean Payton tree and just, gut it inside out and just start over.
I mean, I kind of laid out exactly why his answer doesn't work. But so I won't, restate everything. But I do think what he is saying is kind of like the copy and paste you're hearing a lot of people say. It's like, don't hire Aaron Glenn because he has ties to the Saints. Well, what if Aaron Glenn is a really good head coach? Like, what if Aaron Glenn is one of the best candidates in the coaching cycle? Are you going to not hire him just because he was with the Saints for a little while? Because Dan Campbell was with the Saints for a little while too. And I think everybody would be totally okay with him being the head coach. There's like this weird stigma that if they coached here, they are tainted. And it's not going to work. I just don't understand that. Now, I do agree, you don't want to just like retread after retread after retread after retread. But sometimes, like, someone that is connected to that staff or someone that is connected to that time can be okay. So I think you vet everyone equally, and then you decide who's the best head coach candidate. If Glenn is, go with Glenn. And having a defensive head coach doesn't mean you can't have a great offense. Having an offensive head coach doesn't mean you can't have a great defense. Then it's up to that coach to delegate and find the coordinators and find the assistants. Again, Dan Campbell, not an X's and O's guy. Dan Campbell, you would not consider a genius offensive mind. But who's got one of the best offenses, maybe the best offense in the NFL? The Detroit Lions. Why? Because they have Ben Johnson. Why? Because Dan Campbell built his staff and delegated the offensive responsibilities to Ben Johnson. Okay, Dan Quinn. Retread. Dan Quinn. Old school. Dan Quinn. Defensive minded. The Commanders are sweet offensively. Jaden Daniels, sweet. Why do you think that is? Because he delegated that responsibility to Cliff Kingsbury, and it's worked out really well. There you go. Like, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. And I think a lot of people are, I think in this situation, and this is why I think we're kind of different on this, is that you can be very monocled. You can be very fixated on just the Saints. And you can analyze this as just the Saints. But if you take 50 steps back and analyze it as a team in the NFL, and you look at what other teams in the NFL are doing, and you just grade it that way, then I think it opens your mind up a little bit. Whereas if you just look at this as the New Orleans Saints, you're like, nope, can't have Glenn because he was attached to the Saints. But if you step back, you're like, well, actually, Aaron Glenn, depending on how if Detroit wins the Super Bowl, Aaron Glenn is probably one of the top 3 most, sought after coaches in this coaching window. So all of a sudden, if you take a couple steps back, you're like, no, we don't want the DC from the Super Bowl champions because he was here for a little bit there. Whereas other teams are like cutting in line to try and get there. So during this whole process, I would advise to see this through the lens of the entirety of the NFL versus just the New Orleans Saints.
Let me drill down deeper on your thoughts on the organization. So if they want to keep doing things the way they've done them, then that would indicate that they don't think that anything is necessarily wrong, which they haven't been good in 4 years since Drew Brees left. And I guess they would have to be pinning this on injuries. The reason things haven't gone well is because they've gotten hurt. Is that what you think they believe at the highest level of the organization?
So if you say yes to this, it really doesn't matter. Because if you say, well, we would be good if it wasn't for the injury, so let's just run it back, right? You can't do that because you can't keep running it back, like I said, because some of those players aren't even here. But there's also something called contracts, and there's something called age. And eventually players retire, or players get old, or players play out their contracts, and then they just organically go away. Derek Carr, no doubt about it. Derek Carr's 2 years in New Orleans has been plagued with injuries, both for him, but also for people around him. But you can only run it back for so long. One, because Derek Carr only has 2 years left on his contract. Two, Derek Carr is getting up in age, right? So even if you believe the former, even if you believe, DeMario Davis, same thing. Taysom Hill, same thing. Like Taysom Hill, no doubt about it. Him being injured was not awesome for the Saints. No doubt about it. Taysom Hill is sweet when healthy. Well, Taysom Hill is coming off of a very serious injury. He is, 33 years old? So the amount of time that you can just run it back with him is limited. Not going to happen. Michael Thomas, we saw with that. Did injuries plague Michael Thomas, and was injuries the reasons that he wasn't as successful? Yes. But what happened? His contract got to a point where they couldn't carry it over, and they had to get rid of him. Was what it was. So sometimes you have to have like sometimes life or just outstanding variables like age, like contracts, like all injuries. Some of that plays in, and you don't have the option anymore. The Saints don't have the option anymore to just run it back and keep these players. And another thing too, they just mentioned was like the Saints, quote unquote, like doing it how they've always done it. If you look at the past 15 years, the Saints have been a offense first, high flying team. So if it's like, yeah, the Saints are going to do it how they've always done it, it's like, well, how they've always done it, for the most part, has been offense first, offensive minded head coach, high flying offense. Like only the past couple of years have the Saints been this like conservative, old school team under Dennis Allen. So that's a little bit of like, what have you done for me lately versus like the big picture of the franchise?
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the things that Mickey Loomis continues to say after every season that's come to an end the last 4 years. We're there. We're close if we were healthy. Look, man, I think this might be the first year where the players are starting to say we can't use injuries as an excuse. I mean, they're right. This is finally the year that the players have actually said, we can't use injuries as an excuse, even though like, hey, yeah, we suffered some historical injuries, but we still can't use that as an excuse. I mean, at some point in time, 4 years of saying the same thing, it's almost sounded just like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same exact result. It's got to change. Like, legit, it has to change. I just can't imagine, Gail, Dennis Lauscha, and Mickey Loomis thinking this is fine. It isn't fine. I mean, don't tell your fan base that we're close if. Those aren't like ifs and we're close aren't getting you wins. They're putting you in a worse spot right now. And I think I think a lot of people will agree with this sentiment. It's time to move on. It's time to kind of, do a little rebuild, maybe gut it a little bit. I mean, James Hurst even agrees with that. It's time to gut it because it ain't working and you're getting too old on that roster.
Yeah, and they're going to naturally gut kind of themselves. Naturally, that is happening right now. Like, everyone needs to take their head out of the sand, look around, and realize, like, well, yeah, actually, what we're saying should happen is happening, even if we're not like making it happen, it's just happening on its own. If you look at the roster over the next 2 years, we'll go ahead and lay them out there. Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, on the Paulson Adebo has a contract up. We've got Chase Young doesn't have a contract. All right, that's 5 on the defense, and that's not even counting some of the other players who might just not be good enough to be on the roster. But then you go on the offense. Ryan Ramczyk just retired. Okay, you've got Derek Carr on a big contract who's probably going to get released, who's aging out anyways. Taysom Hill, big contract, going to get restructured. 2 years left on his deal, aging out, or 1 year, I guess, going into next year, aging out of his contract. You go running back, Alvin Kamara, getting up in age, best player we have, but also only a couple years left on his contract. Kendra Miller, see you later. Jordan Mims, see you later. Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson, playing for his next contract. He's going to be gone. All right, we don't even have a wide receiver, but Chris Olave is basically the only receiver. Rashid Shaheed, I guess you could say. Everyone else, who the hell knows? So you look at that roster, and you're sitting and then you go to the coaching staff. We don't have a head coach. We don't have a defensive coordinator. We don't have a defensive staff. You look at that. That's not even making decisions. That's just contracts, age, injury, and you're talking about the turnover of what? The better part of like 15, 16 starters and a head coach and an entire defensive staff without even making a decision, without even saying, yeah, actually, blank player isn't good enough, blank player we're releasing, blank player we're trading. That's just nature taking its course.
No question about that part. They are getting far, far too old, and the only way to fix that is with the draft. So let's talk about some of the candidates that have popped up with names of folks that are supposedly being contacted and requested for interview. You got Aaron Glenn, you got Joe Brady, you got Mike Vrabel. What is your reaction to some of these names that are trickling out, and have any surprised you?
No, none of them have surprised me. Not at all. I mean,
By the way, I don't know when this was filmed, but Aaron Glenn did do his virtual interview with the Saints.
but I'll be honest with you, Mike Vrabel was going to take the Patriots job, so they can just go scratch that one off, all right? Either Patriots or Bears. I mean, he's not coming here. And I also don't like to hear the words people don't want to come here. While I have criticized, the front office and some of the decisions that have been made, I still think they have a good owner. I still think the Saints have a good owner, but it's probably the roster that's scaring a lot of people away. We can go into detail about how I think that, people shouldn't be scared to come take this job, because look what Dan Campbell did in Detroit. And that was a far worse situation than what the Saints are dealing with. I mean, he took over a disaster, and look where they're at now. So that's my opinion on.
Don't forget, he failed spectacularly his first 2 years, so the organization also gave him some patience.
The Saints situation.
We covered this before, but Dan Campbell's first 2.5 years in Detroit was worse than Dennis Allen's 2.5 years or whatever with the Saints. And Allen got fired, and Campbell's a demigod.
So I mean, look, I told you I want an offensive-minded head coach if it were me. I mean, Joe Brady's 35. I mean, little skins on the wall. I mean, he's done a good job, but how will he be? Can he command the room? Can he be a leader? Can he do that, when Josh Allen isn't your quarterback? That becomes the question, So that's where Aaron Glenn comes to the top of the mind, because he's had to deal with the injuries. He's, had to build from bottom up with Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson, who, by the way, would be my top choice as the head coach for the Saints, is Ben Johnson. But at least he's been there, seen it, and done it. How would he do here? Can he build a staff? Are they going to force him to keep the offensive staff is also the question. But no, I'm not surprised. I am not surprised that, who's on that list.
Darren Rizzi is on that list. Your thoughts there?
The players love him, man.
You know what's interesting about Rizzi is that when you hear people say, I want an offensive-minded head coach, I want an offensive this, I want a young this, it's like, well, if you want all that, maybe the answer is to keep Rizzi and Kubiak. Because Kubiak is all the stuff that people say, right? Young, offensive-minded, Shanahan tree. Okay, well, Kubiak does fit all of that. Darren Rizzi is kind of this man manager who has the locker room, players love him, all that. Are people sneaky, high-key, low-key, high-key talking themselves into Rizzi and Kubiak and finding a new DC? Because it kind of checks their boxes. I think that's very interesting. You could say, well, the Saints offense isn't as good as the Lions offense. No, it is certainly not. But what would Ben Johnson do with Spencer Rattler, Bub Means, Mason Tipton, Dante Pettis, and Connor McGovern? That's the real question, is how much would Ben Johnson get out of that, and how much would Clint Kubiak get out of the Lions offense? I think that would be a very interesting hypothetical.
The players do love him and respect him a lot. They really spoke highly of him since he took over for Dennis Allen, and he even said it again yesterday. I mean, Alvin Kamara vouched for him. He would like to see him as a next head coach, but understands the decision isn't on the players. And a very passionate guy. I mean, a Jersey guy, so he's passionate. Loved the team, loved the city, and he got emotional after the game Sunday. About this job and the players and the organization. I just think it's a long shot. He's gonna have a shot, but I believe it's a long shot.
What is the future of Derek Carr?
I think he's going to be gone.
He said he's not taking a pay cut yesterday.
Shouldn't take a pay cut. We covered that, but I think it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up for what the Saints want to do, what the Saints have to do, and the way Carr's contract scales. Oh, and the $30 million. I mean, just the $30 million roster bonus for a team that's getting younger and trying to shed contracts and trying to kind of rebuild and change the identity. That doesn't really fit. Oh, yeah, let's pay $30 million guaranteed bonus to our aging quarterback on the penultimate year of his contract. It just doesn't add up. So if you do the quick maths, I think Carr gets released.
And look, it's not his fault that he's not going to take a pay cut. They're the ones who gave him the money. So Sharif and Hunt were making $40 million a year. They said, we need to take a pay cut. I'm not taking a pay cut. Sorry.
Yeah,
you gave me that money. Now, he's willing to restructure, but he's not taking a pay cut. I don't know, man. I mean, it's going to be a rebuild. I mean, it's going to be a situation where they're probably at 4 or 5, 6 wins next year. So maybe they just cut them loose and try to save the money post June 1st cut, and try to save them $28, $29, $30 million. So I wouldn't be surprised if they cut them loose. I mean, it's just not fit.
Another unanswerable question, but I think an interesting conversation nonetheless. Like, what do you think the conversation is like between the candidates who are interviewing with the Saints executives and their discussions about Derek Carr? Like, do you think the next coach gets to make that call? Do you think they're kind of telling what they think in terms of the salary cap? Like, how do you think that conversation goes?
There's definitely a question. It's definitely a question of like, hey, look, here's the situation. Here's what we have. What would you do? And I think it's up to that candidate to kind of say what they would do and if that jives with what Mickey and the front office want. But I think certain candidates will absolutely be like, no, I want to draft someone. No, I want a younger quarterback. No, I want, I think I can make Rattler do this, or I think we could, like, they're going to have their own ideas. So, but I would be very surprised at any coach who was like, yeah, I think the best foot forward is for me to come in, take Derek Carr, pay him whatever, $50 million, $30 million guarantee. We can win now. I think that would be kind of crazy to hear because I don't think they can win now. I think you need a coach kind of similar to what Dan Campbell inherited in Detroit, where it's like, look, this is going to be a couple of years. We have to win the draft every single year, every single pick. We have to have another 2017, 2016 draft where we get a bunch of all pros and a bunch of like stud players, impact players, get younger, then win. That's what the coach is going to have to do. That's the conversation. So I do think you talk about it. Like, I think the coaches are talking about Derek Carr. They are talking about other players too. Just like I think Kubiak, when he was interviewing, I think his conversation was probably a lot of what do you think you can do with this offense? What can you do with Taysom Hill? What can you do with Derek Carr? What can you do with Alvin Kamara? You do have to factor all that stuff in. So I think that is question one or two for these interviews.
The conversation has to be like, hey, listen, Mickey, do I have to keep him? Are you tied to him? I mean, we have a ex head coach has a player in mind that they would like to bring in. We would like to know if you'd let us make the decision on our head quarterback and our staff. I just don't see, Derek fitting on our team if I'm the head coach. And Mickey can fire back with, well, we owe him this much money. We have to keep him at least 1 year. And maybe they say, fine, we'll do it for 1 year. And they'll just see what happens next year. But I'd assume that coach is going to want the decision on who his quarterback is because it's Dennis' quarterback. It's not the new coach's quarterback. They may not want that quarterback. Look what Dan did when he went to Detroit. He traded Matthew Stafford and got Jared Goff. You
can look at Chicago, too. Chicago, Eberflus and them inherited Justin Fields. He wasn't their guy. They had to kind of deal with it for a year. The next thing you know, he's out of there. So, yeah, I mean, coaches do want their guy. I mean, that just happens. So that's why it would be so surprising, unless it was John Gruden, for a coach to come in and be like, nope, I'm locked in with Derek Carr.
Wanted that quarterback, and they got picks in return. They're not getting that. Let's be honest. They are not getting any first-round picks and a Jared Goff in a trade.
Yeah.
So I think the new head coach is going to probably say, I don't, necessarily need to have Derek Carr as my quarterback, and we can just go ahead and start working for the future.
It's definitely an interesting time down there in New Orleans, and it'll certainly materialize as the week progresses. Sharif, we appreciate the time. We'll talk next week and see if the Saints are closer to finding a coach.
All right, but it's going to be a long process. I think it's going to be quite a few weeks before they find a head coach.
I would agree with that. We'll.
You know how it works. Like, the dominoes fall pretty fast. Like, once Vrabel goes here, then that means Ben Johnson goes here. Once he goes there, then that means this person goes here and that person goes here. It all happens. It takes a while for that first domino to fall, but once that first domino falls, I think it all happens relatively quickly. So let me know in the comments below. Talked about a lot of different topics there. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.